In 1877, dark rumours swirled around Crazy Horse. He was forced to leave his ailing wife to travel to Fort Robinson and clear his name. He didn't know it, but the second he walked through the gates, he'd sealed his tragic fate. Hailed now as a hero and fearless leader for his people, Crazy Horse lived and died as an enemy of the US government. His name is legendary, but there was more to his life than just legend. The general consensus is that Crazy Horse was born somewhere between 1840 and 1845, and it didn't take long before he rose to prominence among his people. When he was a young boy, he witnessed an incident that changed him forever. A white officer, John Grattan, made his way to Crazy Horse's camp and demanded compensation for his stolen cow. The cow had wandered into the camp earlier and someone had butchered it to share its meat with everyone. Unfortunately, this ended up having dire consequences. When no one acknowledged him, Grattan signalled his officers to open fire. The result was devastating. Conquering Bear, the chief, was fatally wounded. The Lakota retaliated and brought down Grattan and all 29 of his men. The day was horrifying, but it dawned on Crazy Horse that this wasn't a one-off event. The Lakota were the biggest tribe of the Sioux people and had lived peacefully on their land until the 1850s. White settlers started making their way into the Great Plains, and with them came ruin. The Grattan conflict Crazy Horse had witnessed became the forerunner of the First Sioux War between the United States and the Lakota. Crazy Horse was disturbed after the conflict. Ancient Lakota tradition dictated that a young man may seek a vision to help him fulfill his destiny. Around this time, he started to see fleeting visions and went on a vision quest with his father, Waglula. Father and son sat in an isolated spot in the hills in modern South Dakota. In his vision, Crazy Horse saw a dancing, swaying horse and a simply dressed warrior with a feather on his head. The man had a lightning bolt on his cheek and hailstones painted on his body. The warrior told Crazy Horse to live simply and to never take any scalps or war trophies in battle. Crazy Horse's vision had shown him the southern world, where the Lakota believed spirits went in the afterlife. In battle, he would imagine being in that world again, allowing him to fight without fear. He also emulated the warrior he'd seen, copying his style of face paint and refusing to wear traditional headgear. The Lakota allied themselves with the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes and decided to take up arms against the United States Army. Crazy Horse played an important role in both the Battle of Platte Bridge and the Battle of Red Buttes. His fighting skills, bravery and strength won him the title of Shirt Wearer, which meant leader. Crazy Horse was no fan of the government's plan of encroaching their tribal land, so when he learned that they wanted to build a road to the gold fields in Montana, he was at the forefront of the resistance. The idea was to plant decoys on the officers' route and lure them towards their doom. Captain William Fetterman, who was leading 80 men from Fort Kearny, fell for the trap and walked into the ambush. The event became known as the Fetterman Fight, though the Native Americans called it the Battle of the 100 in the Hands. It ended badly for the Americans. None of them survived the attack. It was the US Army's worst defeat at the hands of the Native Americans up to that point, and there was more bloodshed to come. After their successful campaign against Fetterman, Crazy Horse, alongside Lakota leader Red Cloud, led their people to another attack, this time against the officers stationed near Fort Kearny. But while the Fetterman fight was a victory, this plan ended in disaster. They'd hoped to use the same decoy trick they'd used before, but the officers got wind of their plan and took refuge. The Americans had fast-shooting rifles called breechloaders, while the tribesmen mainly just had bows and arrows. Crazy Horse's forces retreated after some hours of fighting, when more officers came to defend their unit. The difference in casualties was huge, anywhere from 50 to 120 Native Americans and only 5 Americans. Crazy Horse realised the futility of charging against white men in a strong defensive position, and this became the last such charge he ever led. His people soon knew him as a quiet and reserved person who was generous to a fault. He was fearless in battle and always led from the front. He was very protective about his people's way of life, and he proved time and time again that he was willing to do whatever it took to preserve it. A woman named Black Shawl came to take care of Crazy Horse after a painful injury and ended up becoming his wife. However, their marital bliss would quickly be shattered by tragedy. Crazy Horse didn't leave behind a large family. He only had one daughter with Black Shawl, who fell ill and died at just 3 years old. The title of shirt wearer was a great honour, and Crazy Horse received it because of his daring exploits and fearlessness in battle. Basically, it meant that everyone accepted him as their leader. Unfortunately, Crazy Horse wasn't perfect, and his behaviour eventually led to the elders stripping him of his title. Records show that Crazy Horse had another wife, Nellie Larrabee, the child of a French trader and a Cheyenne woman. Many believed the US Army had sent her to act as a spy. There are accounts describing her as an evil and insidious woman whose manipulations led to Crazy Horse's destruction. All Crazy Horse wanted was for the Americans to leave his people be so they could live according to their traditional ways. For a moment, it seemed like he might get his wish. In 1868, the government signed the Treaty of Fort Laramie. The landmark accord gave the Sioux control of the Black Hills of South Dakota. But soon after the treaty, prospectors found gold in the Black Hills, and the government pushed the Sioux to sell them the land. Naturally, they refused, but the US government rarely takes no for an answer. Instead, they ordered the Sioux to leave and move to smaller reservations. One of the greatest charges Crazy Horse ever led was at the Battle of Rosebud. As Brigadier General George Crook marched to force the Native Americans to the reservations, the Lakota and Cheyenne warriors led by Crazy Horse took him by surprise. The Native Americans fearlessly drove Crook and his men back to their camp in Wyoming. The Lakota-Cheyenne partnership was strong, in large part because they had a leader like Crazy Horse who was unwilling to back down. In fact, at over 6 hours, the Battle of Rosebud became known as the longest and bloodiest engagement between the Sioux and the Americans. An officer, Captain Mills, called Crazy Horse and his warriors the best cavalry soldiers on earth. Not only did Crazy Horse's tactics force Crook and his men to withdraw to their camp, they also made him unable and unwilling to proceed to Little Bighorn. This meant they weren't there to help Lieutenant Colonel George Custer, whom the government had sent to round up and relocate the Sioux to the reservations. The result, a decisive victory for Crazy Horse at the Battle of Little Bighorn, one of the biggest military disasters in US history. The government had estimated that Crazy Horse had at most 800 warriors alongside him. That's the number Custer expected to face at Little Bighorn. Unfortunately for him, many of the Native Americans who had already left for the reservations had returned to join and help their hostile cousins. Custer's men stood no chance against the 1,000 to 1,500 warriors who arrived. The Americans faced severe casualties in a fight that lasted under an hour. Infamously, Custer himself was killed in the fray. The Battle of Little Bighorn became the last decisive battle in the Great Sioux War. Although the Native Americans won that round decisively, they couldn't stop the US government in the long run. Their policy of depleting the buffalo herds and raiding Sioux camps and villages was effective, and pretty soon Crazy Horse's people found themselves on the brink. Some of Crazy Horse's fellow leaders, like Sitting Bull, who'd fought alongside him at Little Bighorn, moved to Canada not long after. Crazy Horse remained, but after facing a winter of hardship and very little food, he was finally forced to make a heartbreaking decision, one he knew was essential to protect his people. In 1877, Crazy Horse surrendered to the government, and they took him to a reservation in Fort Robinson, Nebraska. When he rode to Fort Robinson with his friends and followers, the procession stretched for 2 miles. The Lakota all hailed him with songs, cheers, and applause. An army officer who witnessed his arrival called it more of a triumphal march than a surrender. Unfortunately, this made older leaders like Red Cloud jealous, and this jealousy would have devastating consequences. The army officers mistrusted Crazy Horse because of his popularity. They didn't believe he would keep the peace, although that's what he intended to do. He'd made a promise to the Great Spirit that he wouldn't fight anymore. However, the officers pushed him to help them catch some warriors from the Nez Perce tribe who'd escaped from the reservation, and they wouldn't take no for an answer. Tired of their constant pressure, Crazy Horse agreed to fight until there wasn't a Nez Perce left. He didn't realise it at the time, but he would come to regret those words. A vengeful interpreter named Gruard deliberately changed Crazy Horse's message, writing that he would fight until there wasn't a white man left. At the same time, Red Cloud had already planted doubt in Crook's mind, telling him Crazy Horse wanted him dead. Convinced that Crazy Horse had gone rogue, Crook ordered his detention. When Crazy Horse heard about all the rumours, he panicked. Sure of his innocence, he returned to Fort Robinson to try and explain, but he was only marching to his own doom. The officers there had already decided his fate. Upon arrival, guards captured him and tried to discreetly lead him to a cell. When Crazy Horse realised what was happening, he struggled and tried to escape. In the confusion, a guard pierced him in the back with his bayonet. Crazy Horse's longtime friend and cousin, Touch the Clouds, was with him in his last moments. The guards took him to an adjutant's office, but showing his customary spirit, Crazy Horse refused to be put in the white man's cot. He succumbed to his injuries on September 5th, 1877, at the age of 36 or 37. After his passing, Crazy Horse's elderly parents took his body and moved his remains to an undisclosed location. To this day, no one knows where his final resting place is. Unassuming and self-effacing by nature, Crazy Horse didn't like being photographed. Although there are some alleged pictures of him, there's no way of confirming their authenticity. In fact, most experts believe that no photograph of him exists. South Dakota is home to Mount Rushmore, with faces of past American presidents chiselled into the granite face of the mountain. Considering this a gross unfairness to the people who originally lived on the land, a Lakota elder and a Polish-American sculptor decided that a Native American hero should be honoured in the same way, and there's no bigger hero for the Lakota than Crazy Horse. Thus far, only his face has been carved into Thunderhead Mountain, even after 71 years of hard work. While many of his Lakota descendants are grateful to have a symbol of their history carved in stone for the world to see, there are also a number of people who consider the huge sculpture a mockery of Crazy Horse's ideals, and of the humble person he was. Thanks for watching History Expose. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more incredible facts about everything.